Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling a really big one. Human evolution, both our past and, well, our future.
Yeah, it's huge.
You send in a fantastic mix of sources looking at ancient origins, recent changes, technology's role, even how we might look way down the line.
Right.
So our mission today is basically to sift through all this great material and pull out the key insights for you. Kind of a shortcut to understanding this massive topic.
Exactly. We've got a lot to draw on. There's the Smithsonian's work on climate and early humans, Vision Learning on future evolution, Startups Magazine on tech's physical impact, discussions from Reddit and Wikipedia on recent evolution, a PMC article looking at longevity,
Okay.
the Australian Museum's ideas about future appearances, and Library ETD on genetic engineering. It's quite a spread.
It really is. Okay, so let's dive in. We'll start way back, looking at, the big picture, early human development, environmental pressures shaping us.
Long view, yeah.
Then we'll zoom in a bit, look at the faster changes in the last, say, 10,000 years. Then tackle technology's impact, which is huge now. And finally, peek into the really distant, maybe even strange future possibilities.
Sounds like a good plan. So that long view first. The Smithsonian's research is really interesting here, showing this link between big climate swings over the last 800,000 years and, well, our brains getting bigger. Encephalization.
Right, so it wasn't just big brains good, it was more like unpredictable, weather-favored, smarter, more adaptable creatures.
Exactly. Those major climate shifts seem to have given an edge to humans with larger brains. Better information processing, planning, problem solving, in constantly changing landscapes.
That's the variability selection hypothesis, isn't it? The more varied the challenges, the more useful a flexible brain is.
Precisely. And this period, it also saw the rise of symbolic communication. The Smithsonian points to things like engraved ochre, decorative items, evidence going back at least 250,000 years.
Wow. Using symbols, abstract shapes, decoration to convey meaning, that's a massive step.
It really is.
And even though we don't have, fossilized language,
We don't.
it seems obvious that more complex communication must have been developing alongside this. Crucial for sharing ideas, survival tactics in those shifting worlds.
Absolutely. And the Smithsonian suggests this symbolic ability was fundamental, not just for talking, but for planning, storing information outside your own head, even, imagination and abstract thought.
Okay, so let's jump forward, a big jump. To the last 10,000 years or so, agriculture arrives and things seem to speed up.
Yeah, dramatically.
The Reddit discussion mentioned something relatable. Maybe our jaws shrinking because of softer foods. But our teeth, especially wisdom teeth, haven't quite caught up, leading to crowding and impaction for lots of us.
It's a perfect example of a major environmental shift, how we eat, putting pressure on our physical form. But maybe the clearest recent adaptation is lactose tolerance.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic. Wikipedia and Reddit both covered how the ability to digest milk as an adult popped up independently in different places.
Right, wherever people started relying heavily on dairy. Mostly Northern Europeans, but also some populations in Africa and Asia.
And it's amazing, it wasn't just one mutation spreading, but multiple different ones leading to the same result.
Convergent evolution, yeah. Different groups finding the same genetic solution to the same dietary opportunity.
Fascinating stuff. And the Reddit thread also brought up disease resistance. That's a huge evolutionary driver.
Absolutely critical.
Like how Europeans, living with domestic animals for ages, built up resistance to diseases that then wiped out huge numbers of Native Americans who didn't have that exposure history.
And the genetic bottleneck during the peopling of the Americas probably didn't help either, reducing their genetic diversity for resistance.
Though there's the idea maybe syphilis went the other way.
There's some debate, yeah. But the main point is infectious diseases are incredibly powerful selective forces.
Definitely. And then you get more specific things like the suggestion maybe Inuit populations eating raw meat have more functional appendixes. Still debated, I think.
It's an interesting hypothesis, yeah.
Yeah.
And we have clearer examples like the sickle cell trait protecting against malaria in heterozygotes.
Right. Very common where malaria is endemic.
Or the alcohol flush reaction in some East Asian populations. It really shows how local environments shape us genetically.
Yeah, Wikipedia had a whole list of recent stuff. Tibetans adapting to high altitude with that EPAS1 gene variation. The Bajau sea nomads in Southeast Asia having larger spleens, presumably an adaptation for diving.
Incredible.
And even things that seem maybe less critical, like blonde hair and blue eyes spreading relatively fast in Britain in the last couple of thousand years, maybe linked to vitamin D synthesis or even sexual selection.
Possibly both. And we see selection favoring increased height and slightly larger head and female hip sizes in Britons too, even in recent times.
It's still kind of wild to think that light skin in Europeans really took off maybe only 5,000 or so years ago. A selective sweep probably driven by vitamin D needs in northern latitudes.
Yeah, or even nose shapes varying potentially to help warm or humidify air in different climates.
The speed is what gets me sometimes. Malaria resistance popping up in Cape Verde in just the last few centuries, like 20 generations.
That's incredibly fast evolution. Shows how strong the pressure for malaria is.
Or that EDAR gene mutation in East Asians affecting sweat glands, hair thickness, teeth becoming common after the last ice age.
Right, around 35,000 years ago it appeared, but really spread after the last glacial maximum, maybe helping with climate adaptation.
Could be. And Inuit adaptations to high-fat diets and cold, maybe thicker facial fat, flatter faces, also possibly linked back to that post-glacial period.
It seems there might even have been a relaxation of selection for larger brains after the Ice Age, interestingly enough.
Huh. Okay, so that brings us more towards the present and technology. Startups magazine had this piece suggesting tech isn't just a tool anymore, it's part of our environment.
A really powerful part.
And could it actually be driving physical evolution? Like the article mentioned posture changes from screens, hunching over. Could that become, permanent over generations?
Well, it highlights how behavior linked to technology affects our bodies now. Whether that translates to heritable evolutionary change is a bigger question, but it's a valid point that our tech environment is shaping us physically. Stretching helps, they noted.
Good tip. And then there's medical tech. C-sections came up in vision learning and Wikipedia. The idea that they might be easing the selection pressure related to baby head size versus mother's pelvic width.
Right. If babies with larger heads who might not have survived childbirth previously now do, and women with narrower pelvises who might have struggled also reproduce successfully.
Then those traits could theoretically become more common over time.
Exactly. While there isn't clear evidence yet of average head size increasing in normal births, there is a correlation seen between C-sections and women having narrower hips. It's a form of artificial selection, really.
And that leads straight into genetic engineering. CRISPR library TD went into this. It's made gene editing so much more accessible, like molecular scissors for DNA.
Yeah, it's been revolutionary. And using it for somatic cell editing, fixing genes in a person's body cells, not their reproductive cells, has huge potential for therapies.
Like for sickle cell anemia, right.
Yeah.
That research is ongoing, and it generally feels less ethically fraught because the changes aren't inherited.
Correct. The really tricky ethical ground, as Librate ETD points out, is germline editing, making changes that are heritable passed down through generations.
Like the controversial case in China a few years back using CRISPR on embryos. That sparked a massive debate.
Understandably so. It opens up a whole Pandora's box of questions about enhancing humans, designer babies.
Which connects to transhumanism, that idea vision learning touched on, actively using tech to evolve ourselves, add new capabilities, bionic parts, maybe even uploading minds eventually.
Yeah. Though it's important, as they noted, to distinguish between technological augmentation and biological evolution, changes in heritable genes. A bionic arm isn't passed down genetically.
Got it. But something like CRISPR gene drives could be evolutionary, right? Spreading a trait through a whole population.
Potentially, yes. They're being developed for things like making mosquitoes resistant to malaria to wipe out the disease, using them in humans for heritable changes. That's a whole other level of complexity and ethics, especially given the history of eugenics.
A definite cautionary tale there about societal biases driving genetic choices. Risk of conformity.
Definitely.
Okay, so pushing even further out, the distant future. The Australian Museum mentioned this idea of a grand averaging of human looks as global travel and intermixing continue.
Makes sense. More gene flow tends to homogenize populations over time, at least visually.
But what about leaving Earth? Vision learning brought up space colonies. If there's still contact back and forth with Earth,
then gene flow probably continues, maybe slowing down that averaging, but not stopping it entirely across different settlements.
But if we go interstellar, colonies isolated for thousands, maybe millions of years.
Then you could absolutely see divergence. Founder effects, small starting gene pools, plus genetic drift, new mutations, and crucially, different selective pressures on different planets.
That could genuinely lead to new human species eventually, couldn't it? Speciation.
It's theoretically possible over vast timescales. Vision learning even suggested behavioral isolation, like colonists just not finding Earth humans attractive anymore, or vice versa, could be an early step.
Wow. Plus the possibility of deliberately genetically engineering humans to suit new worlds.
That's also on the table in those far future scenarios, yes.
And what about just living longer? The PMC article talked about longevity. Is there a hard limit?
Well, the evidence is debated. Some argue there's a biological ceiling, maybe around 115 or 120, but the maximum reported age keeps slowly ticking up. Emma Morano lived to 117.
And some experts, like Stephen Ostad mentioned in the article, predict people born before 2001 might see a 150 by the year 2150.
It's a bold prediction, but reflects the active research into anti-aging medicine. Whether we can significantly push the boundaries remains to be seen, but there's no definitive proof of a fixed limit yet.
So how does all this medical progress feed back into evolution? Wikipedia noted that saving people from genetic diseases or infections means those genes stay in the pool.
Right. It potentially increases the frequency of traits that natural selection might have previously weeded out if access to that medical care remains consistent.
But we also face new pressures, like antibiotic resistance. That's natural selection in action right now.
A very dangerous example, yes.
And that childbirth dynamic we mentioned. The C-sections potentially allowing larger heads and narrower hips to coexist in the gene pool. That evolutionary tug of war is being altered.
It seems so. It's a complex interplay.
Finally, Wikipedia also mentioned evolutionary medicine's view on things like autism or autoimmune disorders rising, the hygiene hypothesis.
Yeah, the idea that our super clean environments mean our immune systems don't get trained the way they used to, potentially leading to misfires like allergies or autoimmune conditions. It's one perspective on how modern life interacts with our evolved biology.
It really paints a picture of us being constantly shaped by our world, but now increasingly shaping that world and maybe even our own biology in return.
Really unique point in our species' history, perhaps.
So, wrapping this deep dive up. Wow, we've gone from ancient climate swings shaping our brains to rapid fire changes in the last 10,000 years thanks to farming, diseases, moving around.
Yeah, incredible adaptations.
Then the huge impact of technology now, blurring the lines.
That's right.
And looking ahead to potentially engineered future space travel, maybe much longer lives. It covers so much ground.
It really does. And as we said, this is just scratching the surface. The research is constantly evolving, just like we are.
So here's a final thought for you to chew on. With genetic engineering getting more powerful and space travel seeming, well, less like pure science fiction, are we maybe hitting a point where we could consciously direct our own evolution in ways our ancestors never could have dreamed of? And if we are, what does that actually mean? What are the real ethical hurdles, the practical challenges? This dive has shown the complexity, but the future seems wide open with possibilities and maybe some perils too.
A profound question to end on.
Definitely encourage you to check out the sources we talked about. Keep digging into this ongoing story of humanity, where we came from, who we are, and who we might become.